welcome everyone. So this video deals with Prose 3 in celebration of being alive, written by Dr. Christian Bernard. So already we have discussed about the author in the previous class. In the previous video, we discussed that the Dr. Bernard was the first person in the world who had performed a heart transplant surgery in the year 1967. He worried about the infant death, especially the cardiac problem. Once the narrator and his wife met with an accident. So he had 11 broken ribs and his wife got a fracture on her shoulder and they were hospitalized. So while he worried about his suffering, he remembered his father's words. His father advised that suffering makes a man perfect or a better. It's a God's way of testing, but he did not accept it and he did not found any nobility in it. So only he experienced the pain and the suffering. Among 13 points, already we have discussed 6 points. Now let's move on to the 7th one. Here, point number 7. One morning, several years ago, I witnessed what I call the Grand Prix of Cape Town Red Cross Children's Hospital. You know the Grand Prix, it is the car and bike racing. The Cape Town's Red Cross, the Children's Hospital. It opened my eyes to the fact that I was missing something in all my thinking about suffering. Something basic that was full of solace for me. Several years back, when he visited the Cape Town's Red Cross Children's Hospital, he witnessed a Grand Prix. That means there was a race in the hospital. So that changed his mind. So he had a wrong concept about suffering, that suffering people never become a better person. After seeing the incident in the Cape Town Hospital, he changed his idea about suffering and it was a good comfort to him. So here is the 8th point. What happened there that morning was that a nurse had left a breakfast trolley unattended. And very soon, this trolley was commanded by an intrepid crew of 2, a driver and a mechanic. The mechanic provided the motor power by galloping along behind the trolley with his head down, while the driver seated on the mower deck held on with one hand and steered by scraping his foot on the floor. The choice of role was easy because the mechanic was totally blind and the driver had only one arm. Here, look at this picture. This is the breakfast trolley. It is used to supply the food to the patient at the hospital. Here, the narrator shared his experience of what happened in the hospital. Really, it changed his mind. So there was a breakfast trolley, unattended by the nurse. But it was steered by the 2 brave boys, a mechanic and a driver. A mechanic was totally blind and seated on the mower deck. So just to look at the picture, he was sitting on the front. They steered the trolley with one hand and controlled it by scraping his foot on the floor. Then the driver had only one arm and pushed the trolley at the great speed. So that was the Grand Prix. So just they were moving the trolley here and there in the hospital. Here, let's see what happened the next. So they put on quite a show that day. The quite a show means they made a Grand Prix show on the floor of hospital. Judging by the laughter and the shouts of encouragement from the rest of the patients. And the other patients they enjoyed very much. And also they laughed and encouraged them by shouting. And it was much better entertainment than anything anyone puts on at the Indianapolis 500 car race. And also the narrator compared that Grand Prix with the Indianapolis 500 car race. It's a very famous among the world. There was a grand finale of scattered plates and silverware before the nurse and ward sister caught up with them, scolded them and put them back to bed. At the climax, all the silverware and the trolley, they scattered everywhere. And also food split everywhere. So the nurse and ward sister caught them up and scolded them because they had to collect all the silverware and also they have to clean the floor. So they scolded them and sent them back to their beds. Here it is the point number 10. So here tells about the boys. So what happened to them? Let me tell you about the 2 boys. The mechanic was all of 7 years old. He was just a 7 years old boy. One night, when his mother and father were drunk, so both his father and the mother became a drunkard. So his mother threw a lantern at his father. The mist and the lantern broke over the child's head and shoulder. So there was a quarrel between the father and the mother. So mother tried to hit his father, so she threw a lantern at him, but it missed and hit the child's upper part of the body. He suffered the severe third degree burns on the upper part of the body. So at last his upper part of the body got fire and burnt. It became a very severe one. And he lost both his eyes. So because of that incident, he lost all his sight. At the time of Grand Prix, he was walking horror with a disfigured face and a long flap of skin hanging from the sides of the neck to his body. So while they were making the Grand Prix in the floor of the hospital, just he was walking with a disfigured face. What does mean disfigured means? It's very hard to see. If we see any person with a burnt face, is looking really very horror. Then, as the wounds healed around his neck, his lower jaw became gripped in the mass of fibrous tissue. So because of that burnt, so the muscles in the lower jaw became very tightened, so he could not make a movement of his lower jaw. The only way to his little boy could open his mouth was to raise his head. He could not open his mouth in a proper way, so he just raised his head to open his mouth. When I stopped by see him after the race, he said, we won, and he was laughing. But after completing the race, he came and said that they had won the race. So they're really very happy. Here, the point number 11. He tells about the driver. The trolley driver I knew better. The narrator, Dr. Christian Bernard, knew him better very well. A few years earlier, I had successfully closed a hole in his heart. A few years back, the driver approached the doctor in his hospital because he had a hole in his heart. The doctor successfully closed it. That means they cured him. He had returned to the hospital because he had a malignant tumor of the bone. But now he visited the hospital because he had a very dangerous disease in his body. That is called a malignant tumor. What does a malignant means? A very harmful to life. The tumor means a diseased growth some part of the body. Then, the few days before the race, his shoulder and arm were amputated. Amputated means just cut off, removed. So few days before the race, so both his shoulder and arms were removed. That means cut off from the body. There was little hope of his recovery, but the little boy that never worried about that injury. So just he had a little hope of his recovery. So after the Grand Prix, he proudly informed me that the trolley's wheels were not properly oiled. Then after completing the Grand Prix, the driver complained the doctor. So the wheels of the trolley were not properly oiled because of he heard some friction sound. There was no smooth on the wheel. But he was a good driver and he had full confidence in the mechanic. But he was a good driver and also he had a great confidence in the mechanic. So here, both the boys brushed aside their disability and they were happy. And don't let your disability stop your ability. Here, the point number 12. Suddenly, I realized that these two children had given me a profound lesson. Profound means a great lesson in getting on with the business of living. Because the business of living is joy in the real sense of the word, not just something for pleasure, amusement, recreation. The recreation means done for enjoyment. The business of living is celebration of being alive. So here, finally the doctor learned a great lesson on business of living from the life of the two boys. He felt the life doesn't remain only in suffering, but also in finding the real happiness with what is left with us. Here it is the final point. I had been looking at the suffering from the wrong end. So he had a wrong concept about suffering and also he was looking the suffering from the wrong end. So you don't become a better person because you are suffering, but you become a better person because you have experienced suffering. So one cannot become a better person by brooding over his suffering. So one becomes a better person after experiencing suffering. Then, so we cannot appreciate light if we haven't known the darkness. So just a word, just as we cannot appreciate light without knowing darkness, so nor can we appreciate warmth if we have never suffered cold. And also, one cannot appreciate the warmth without experiencing cold. So these children showed me that it is not what you have lost that important. What is important is that what you have left. It's a great message from these boys. So we cannot enjoy the real happiness unless we have experienced suffering. The Dr. Bernard says it is not important what one has lost, but that one has been left with. What a great messages from these two boys. So they really never worried about their disability. So they enjoyed every moment of life. And we believe, so being good and be happy are the business of life. Thank you, students.